LiberalViewer presents.
So I've made 4 videos about money in politics, 1 before and 3 after the Supreme Court's much misunderstood decision in the Citizens United case that I discussed in detail in those last 3 videos, but I think a big reason I still get a lot of disagreement in the comments to those videos is that some viewers misunderstand the evidence about the effect of money on elections, and especially misunderstand the reasoning behind the slogan, "Money equals speech," that Jon Stewart discussed last week with former US Senator Russ Feingold, one of the authors of the McCain-Feingold law overturned in the Citizens United case, as you can see in this clip.
Is Citizens United the issue, or is it that issue of when they ultimately decided that money equals speech? Is that the more fundamental foundation of this that makes it more difficult? Because if once you decide that, you know, as long as your money doesn't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Yeah, well, the court never actually concluded that money is a speech in all cases. They said if it causes corruption or the appearance of corruption, you can regulate it. That's why you have limits on campaign contributions under federal law.
Now, that explanation from Senator Feingold was too simplistic and not entirely accurate, kind of like the slogan "money equals speech" itself, which is said to come from the Supreme Court's 1976 decision in Buckley versus Vallejo that never said money equals speech, but actually said, quote, "Some forms of communication made possible by the giving and spending of money involve speech alone, some involve conduct primarily, and some involve a combination of the two," unquote. So the court never actually said that money equals speech, but the court did rule that political spending should get First Amendment protection as a type of expression, saying it was, quote, "because virtually every means of communicating ideas in today's mass society requires the expenditure of money. The distribution of the humblest handbill or leaflet entails printing, paper, and circulation costs. Speeches and rallies generally necessitate hiring a hall and publicizing the event. The electorate's increasing dependence on television, radio, and other mass media for news and information has made these expensive modes of communication indispensable instruments of effective political speech," unquote. And I think that analysis is still essentially correct even in today's internet world, but just because the court found that political spending should get First Amendment protection doesn't mean it can't be regulated. It only means the regulations must be narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling state interest, which in the case of political spending is the compelling government interest in avoiding corruption or the appearance of corruption. That's why the court allowed the government to limit direct contributions to candidates, which have a higher risk of corruption, but the court struck down limits on independent expenditures not coordinated with a candidate, which bring a lower risk of corruption, and that ruling from the court in 1976 formed a lot of the basis for the court's 2010 ruling in the Citizens United case, which is why I disagree with Senator Russ Feingold's claim on The Daily Show that the Supreme Court just made up the Citizens United ruling that you can see here.
So the problem is Citizens United. It overturned a law from 1907 that nobody ever questioned, and another law from 1947. So basically the Supreme Court just made it up.
Now, the Supreme Court didn't just make it up, as I previously explained, and the court also didn't overturn the law from 1907 that prohibits corporations from directly contributing to candidates, but the bigger flaw in Senator Feingold's claim that Citizens United is the problem is the basic assumption that more spending buys more votes, a very widespread assumption that isn't really supported by the evidence, as Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner discussed in the DVD bonus to their movie Freakonomics that's up on YouTube, beginning with this clip.
So it turns out that people who win political campaigns usually outspend their opponents by a lot. And this is so obvious as a truism that everybody believes it and everybody acts on it, to the point where everybody says, well, politics is broken because there's too much spending, and because there's too much spending, then the wrong people are often in a position to win, and money has way too much influence. But as it turns out, it's not that money wins the elections, it's that the candidate who is much more attractive from the outset raises more money.
Now, what Stephen Dubner is talking about there is the difficulty of proving that more political money actually causes greater political success when it's the popularity that may be bringing in the money. I've also heard Dubner explain it by saying the greater number of people carrying umbrellas before it rains doesn't mean that umbrellas cause rain, but the real evidence for this argument comes from Dubner's Freakonomics partner, Stephen Levitt, who published a study in 1994 that tried to factor out the effect of the candidate's attractiveness by studying rematches between the same candidates with different amounts of money, and that study found very little effect from greater political spending, as Dubner and Levitt explained back on their DVD bonus in this clip.
It turns out that the influence of money itself is just not very large, but our perception of it is huge, because we know that people who end up winning have all this money left over, and the people that end up losing spend all their money, but the money doesn't really help that much. It's just that the attractive people attract more money.
Yeah, I mean, there have been 6 or 7 studies since I first kind of claimed that the campaign spending didn't matter, all of which continue to support the idea that campaign spending doesn't matter.
Now, while all these studies show that spending more money doesn't really matter, candidates do need a certain minimum amount of money to get their name and message out to the voters, which is why in my previous videos I've been a strong supporter of public financing of campaigns, an idea even Jon Stewart and Senator Russ Feingold supported back in The Daily Show in this clip. Even
McCain-Feingold, you're still, you know, the foundation is still the sort of termite-infested foundation that we started with. Why doesn't public financing of elections just, if we have the ability to regulate it, why not just say, this is the way we're going to do it? The elections are 12 weeks, it's publicly financed, this is how it goes.
Well, public financing is the answer. We used to have a good system for presidential public financing.
Right.
It sort of went by the wayside. It needs to be fixed. We've never had it for congressional elections.
And we should have public financing for congressional elections and for presidential elections, which is one solution everyone who wants to open up the political process should support, I think, but I want to know what you think. Outside of direct contributions to candidates that can be corrupting, shouldn't we worry less about limiting the size of independent political expenditures and worry more about making sure every candidate has sufficient resources to get out a message? And given both the legal rulings and economic studies about political spending I presented here, did this video change your view of the somewhat inaccurate slogan, money equals speech?
I YouTube, you decide.